The maid position is filled. My husband's mistress smirked, wearing my clothes. My husband laughed from the couch. I didn't cry. I grabbed her by the neck, looked her dead in the eye, and said 3 words that made her freeze. And when my husband realized it was me, he fainted. I never thought I would return to my own home as a ghost. Not the supernatural kind. The kind that happens when your husband declares you dead while you're still breathing. The kind that happens when the man who promised to love you in sickness and in health decides that sickness is too inconvenient and death is more profitable. My name is Elena Carrington. I am 42 years old. And 3 days ago, I walked through the service entrance of the mansion I built with my family's money, only to find another woman sitting at my vanity, wearing my silk robe, spraying my perfume on her wrists, like she owned every molecule of air in that room. Thank you for being here. This story isn't easy to tell, but knowing you're listening makes it easier. Stay with me until the end, and if you want, let me know where you're from in the comments. I'm curious how far these words will travel. Let me take you back to where it all began. Not to the moment I caught them. That came later. I need to take you back to the accident that started everything. 7 months ago, I was driving home from visiting my mother in Connecticut. It was raining. Not the gentle kind of rain that poets write about, but the violent, angry kind that turns windshield wipers into useless, flapping wings. I was on Route 7, about 40 minutes from our estate in Greenwich, when a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel. I don't remember the impact. I don't remember the glass shattering or the way my car spun 3 times before crashing into the guardrail. I don't remember the paramedics cutting me out of the wreckage or the helicopter that flew me to Yale New Haven Hospital. What I remember is waking up, not immediately, not for 6 weeks. For 6 weeks, I existed in a place between life and death, my brain swelling, my body broken in 7 places, my husband nowhere to be found. The nurses told me later that Marcus visited twice in those first 2 weeks. Twice. His wife of 18 years was in a coma, and he could only manage 2 visits. The first time, he stayed for 20 minutes. The second time, for 12. After that, nothing. When I finally opened my eyes, I was in a private rehabilitation facility in Vermont, a place I'd never heard of, run by people I'd never met. The head nurse, a kind woman named Dorothy, explained that my husband had arranged for my transfer while I was still unconscious. He told them I had no family. He told them not to contact anyone. He told them I was a danger to myself. Your husband was very concerned about your privacy, Dorothy said, her eyes soft with manufactured sympathy. He said the media attention would be too much for you. Media attention. I almost laughed. Marcus had spent our entire marriage avoiding my family's modest fame. The Carringtons weren't celebrities, but we were old money. The kind of family whose name appeared in charity galas and university buildings. The kind of family that makes a certain type of man very, very interested in marriage. I spent 4 months in that facility, learning to walk again, learning to feed myself, learning to recognize my own face in the mirror, because the woman staring back at me was not the woman I remembered. I had lost 31 pounds. My cheekbones jutted out like accusations. My hair, which had always been my pride, had been shorn close to my skull to accommodate the surgeries. I looked like a refugee from my own life. During those 4 months, I called Marcus 17 times. 17 times, his phone went to voicemail. I left messages. I begged. I cried. I told him I was getting better, that I would be home soon, that I loved him despite everything. He never called back. On the 23rd of March, Dorothy came to my room with a strange expression on her face. She was holding a newspaper, which she tried to hide behind her back. "What is it?" I asked. She hesitated. In 4 months, Dorothy had become something like a friend. She had held my hand through the nightmares. She had encouraged me when I took my first steps. She had listened to me talk about Marcus for hours, never once suggesting that his absence was anything other than grief. "Mrs. Carrington," she said slowly, "I need to show you something, and I need you to remain calm." She handed me the newspaper. It was the Greenwich Gazette, our local paper, The one that covered charity events and real estate sales and the occasional scandal among the wealthy. The headline read, "Carrington widow moves on. New love for grieving husband. Widow." The word hit me like a second car crash. I stared at the photograph beneath the headline. There was Marcus, my Marcus, the man I had married when I was 24 years old, standing on the steps of our mansion with his arm around a woman I didn't recognize. She was young, maybe 30, blonde in a way that looked expensive. She was wearing a dress I recognized immediately because I had bought it in Milan 3 years ago. It was my dress, the one I wore to my mother's 70th birthday party. The article explained everything. Elena Carrington, beloved wife of Marcus Carrington, tragically passed away following a car accident on Route 7. After a brief coma, Mrs. Carrington succumbed to her injuries at a private medical facility. Her husband, devastated by the loss, has found comfort in the arms of Victoria Vicky Sinclair, a former interior designer who has been helping him reimagine the family estate. Reimagine. She was reimagining my home, my life, my closet. I read the article 3 times. Then I read it again. The words didn't change. My husband had declared me dead. He had held a funeral. He had collected my life insurance. And he had moved his mistress into my house before my hospital bed was even cold. Dorothy was saying something, but I couldn't hear her. The blood was rushing through my ears like a waterfall. My hands were shaking so badly that the newspaper fell to the floor. "Mrs. Carrington? Elena? Should I call someone?" I looked up at her. My voice, when it came, was steady. Steadier than I expected. "No," I said. "Don't call anyone. I need to think." What I thought about in the 3 weeks that followed was not revenge. Not at first. At first, I thought about the 18 years I had given Marcus Carrington. The way I had loved him when he had nothing. The way I had believed in him when everyone else saw a fortune hunter. The way I had defended him to my mother, who had begged me not to marry a man who looked at our bank accounts before he looked at my face. "He loves me," I had told her. "You're just a snob." My mother had taken my hands in hers. Her eyes were sad. "Elena, darling, I'm not saying he doesn't care for you. I'm saying that a man who marries money will always serve money first. And when the money becomes inconvenient, so will you." I hadn't spoken to her for 6 months after that conversation. Now, lying in my hospital bed, I wondered if she had known something I didn't. If she had seen the calculation behind Marcus's smile. If she had recognized the particular kind of cruelty that disguises itself as charm. It didn't matter now. What mattered was what I was going to do about it. I could have called a lawyer. I could have contacted the police. I could have done any number of sensible, legal things that would have resulted in Marcus's arrest and my immediate restoration to my rightful place. But I didn't want immediate. I wanted complete. I wanted to see exactly who my husband was when he thought I was dead. I wanted to watch him without the mask he had worn for 18 years. I wanted to understand the full scope of his betrayal before I destroyed him. So I made a plan. First, I called my mother's lawyer, Gerald Patterson, not Marcus's lawyer, who had clearly helped him orchestrate my death. My mother's lawyer, who had been managing the Carrington Family Trust for 40 years and who owed Marcus nothing. Gerald was shocked to hear my voice. He had attended my funeral. He had given a eulogy. He had watched Marcus weep into a handkerchief and thought, "What a devoted husband." When I explained what had happened, Gerald went silent for a very long time. "Elena," he finally said, "I need you to understand something. What Marcus has done is not just morally reprehensible, it's criminal. Falsifying a death certificate is a felony. Collecting life insurance on a living person is fraud. And if he's been accessing your trust fund," "He has," I said. I checked. "He's been withdrawing money for months. Then we can have him arrested by tomorrow morning." "No." Gerald paused. "No? I want to go home first. I want to see it. I want to see them in my house, living my life. I want to know everything before I take it back. Gerald tried to talk me out of it. He spent 30 minutes explaining why this was a terrible idea. What if Marcus recognized me? What if the mistress called the police? What if something went wrong? But I was done listening to men tell me what to do. Gerald, as I said, I have spent 4 months in this facility, and the only thing that has kept me alive is the thought of walking into my own home and watching my husband realize that the woman he killed is still breathing. You can help me, or you can get out of my way, but you will not stop me. He helped me. We arranged for my discharge to be quiet. No paperwork filed with the state, no notification to Marcus's lawyers. As far as the official record was concerned, I was still in a coma, still slowly dying, still waiting for my husband to finally pull the plug. Dorothy helped me too. She gave me clothes from the donation bin, shapeless, colorless things that made me look even more like a ghost. She cut what remained of my hair into an unflattering bob. She taught me how to walk with a slight hunch, how to keep my eyes down, how to make myself invisible. You look like a different person, she said, studying her work. I am a different person, I replied. 3 days later, I stood at the service entrance of my own home. The mansion had been in my family for 4 generations. My great-grandfather built it in 1924, when Greenwich was still more farm than fortune. It had 12 bedrooms, a library that had once held over 10,000 books, and a kitchen that my grandmother had personally designed to accommodate her legendary dinner parties. Now, according to the newspaper, it was being reimagined by Victoria Sinclair. I used my old key. Marcus hadn't thought to change the service locks. Why would he? The only person who ever used this entrance was the cleaning staff, and they had been fired months ago. Another cost-cutting measure, no doubt, to help pay for his new lifestyle. The kitchen was different, not drastically, but enough to notice. There were new appliances, modern ones, chrome and sleek, nothing like the vintage pieces my grandmother had collected. The breakfast nook had been painted a garish shade of yellow. The herbs I had grown on the windowsill were gone, replaced by nothing. I moved through the house like a ghost. Like the ghost Marcus had tried to make me. The living room had been updated, with furniture I didn't recognize. The library had been converted into a home gym. My mother's portrait, which had hung above the fireplace for 30 years, had been replaced by a massive television. And then I heard voices. They were coming from upstairs, from the master bedroom, from my bedroom. I climbed the stairs slowly. My legs were still weak from months of rehabilitation. Each step felt like a marathon. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I had come too far to turn back now. The bedroom door was open. I saw her first. Victoria, Vicky, whatever she called herself. She was sitting at my vanity, my grandmother's vanity, the one with the Italian marble top and the gold leaf frame, and she was wearing my robe, the silk one, the one Marcus had given me for our 15th anniversary, when I still believed he loved me. She was spraying my perfume, Chanel No. 5, the scent my mother wore and her mother before her. 4 generations of Carrington women reduced to a prop for this stranger's performance. I stood in the doorway, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even betrayal. Just a vast, empty nothing, like standing at the edge of the ocean and realizing how small you really are. Vicky saw me in the mirror. She didn't turn around. Why would she? I was just a servant, a ghost, a nobody. The maid position is filled, she said, still looking at her own reflection. Go away. She went back to applying my lipstick. My shade. The one I had worn on my wedding day. Something shifted inside me. The nothing became something. The something became everything. I walked into the room, slowly, deliberately. I walked right up behind her, and I watched her eyes widen in the mirror as she realized I wasn't leaving. I said, she started. I grabbed her by the neck. Not hard enough to hurt. Just hard enough to get her attention. Just hard enough to make her look at me. I'm not the maid, I said. My voice was calm, calmer than I had any right to be. I'm the wife. Her face went white, not pale, white, the color of milk, the color of fear. That's impossible, she whispered. You're dead. Do I feel dead to you? The bathroom door opened. Marcus emerged, still laughing at something, a towel around his waist, and a glass of champagne in his hand. My champagne. From my cellar. The bottle I had been saving for my mother's 75th birthday. He saw me. He stopped laughing. His face went through a series of transformations that I will remember for the rest of my life. Confusion, recognition, horror, and finally, something that looked almost like grief. Grief for himself, for his plans, for the future he had built on my grave. Elena, he whispered. Hello, Marcus. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers. It shattered on the hardwood floor, spraying golden liquid across the rug my great-grandmother had brought back from Morocco in 1952. And then my husband fainted. He crumpled like a puppet whose strings had been cut. His head hit the edge of the dresser on the way down, and for one wild moment, I thought I had killed him. I thought the shock had been too much, that his heart had simply stopped, that the universe had decided to save me the trouble of revenge. But no, he was breathing. I could see his chest rising and falling. He was just unconscious, lying on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by broken glass, and the ghost of his greed. Vicky screamed. It was a high, thin sound, like a tea kettle reaching its boiling point. She scrambled away from me, knocking over the vanity chair, pressing herself against the wall, as if she could somehow escape through it. You're dead, she kept saying. You're dead. He said you were dead. He lied. But the funeral, the casket, I saw the flowers, the grave, empty. All of it. A performance for the insurance company and the neighbors. And apparently, for you. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. She was young. Younger than I'd expected. Maybe 28 or 29. Beautiful in a manufactured way. All fillers and fake lashes and hair extensions. The kind of woman Marcus used to dismiss as desperate. But I saw something else in her eyes. Something behind the fear. I saw ambition. I saw calculation. I saw a woman who had looked at my husband and seen not a man, but an opportunity. She wasn't a victim of Marcus's lies. She was his partner. How long? I asked. She pressed herself harder against the wall. What? How long have you been sleeping with my husband? How long have you been living in my house, wearing my clothes, pretending to be me? Her eyes darted to Marcus's unconscious form, as if hoping he would wake up and save her. He didn't move. I don't have to tell you anything, she said, her voice gaining strength. You're the one who's trespassing. This is my home now. Marcus and I are married. The word hit me like a slap. Married. He hadn't just moved on. He hadn't just replaced me. He had married her, while I was still alive. While I was lying in a hospital bed, relearning how to walk, he had stood at an altar and promised to love another woman until death do them part. The irony was almost too perfect. He had tried to kill me for this, for her, for the privilege of sharing my bed with a woman who called herself Mrs. Carrington. I started to laugh. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes when your mind can't process the absurdity of what's happening. The kind of laugh that walks the line between amusement and madness. Vicky backed toward the door. You're crazy, she said. You're insane. I'm calling the police. Go ahead, I said. Call them. Tell them that the woman your husband declared dead just walked into her own home. Tell them about the life insurance he collected. Tell them about the house he's trying to sell. Tell them about the bigamy charges he'll face when they discover he married you while his legal wife was still alive. She stopped. I could see her mind working. I could see her calculating her options, weighing her risks, trying to figure out if there was any way she could come out of this on top. We can make a deal, she said suddenly. Marcus has money. Well, your money, I suppose, but there's plenty of it. We can split it. You can take half and disappear, start a new life somewhere else. No one has to know you're alive. I stared at her. You want me to take a bribe? I said slowly. You want me to accept money, my money, to go away and let you keep living my life. It's practical. Think about it. You've been gone for months. Everyone thinks you're dead. Your friends have moved on. Your family has grieved. Do you really want to come back and deal with all of that? The questions, the lawyers, the media attention? Yes. What? Yes. I want all of it. I want the questions and the lawyers and the attention. I want everyone to know exactly what my husband did. I want his face on the evening news. I want his mugshot in the newspaper. I want his name to become synonymous with betrayal, and I want you right there beside him. Her face hardened. The fear was gone now, replaced by something uglier, something honest. You stupid woman, she hissed. You think you've won? You think you can just waltz back in here and take everything back? Marcus has been planning this for years. He has lawyers, connections, people who owe him favors. By the time he's done with you, you'll wish you had stayed dead. Maybe, I said, but that's tomorrow's problem. Today's problem is what to do with the two of you right now. On the floor, Marcus groaned. He was waking up. I watched his eyes flutter open, watched him take in the ceiling, the broken glass, the two women standing over him like judges at his execution. I watched the memory come back to him, the shock, the horror, the impossible truth of my return. Elena, he said, his voice cracked. Elena, I can explain. I'm sure you can. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. When you didn't wake up, when the doctors said there was no hope, I had to move on. I had to survive. You declared me dead after 6 weeks, Marcus. 6 weeks. I was still breathing, still fighting, and you were already planning my funeral. I was grieving. I wasn't thinking clearly. You were thinking clearly enough to collect my life insurance. You were thinking clearly enough to marry your mistress. You were thinking clearly enough to put my family's home on the market before my grave had grass on it. He sat up slowly, wincing. There was blood on his temple from where he'd hit the dresser. Good. Elena, please. I love you. I've always loved you. Vicky means nothing to me. She was just a distraction, a way to cope with the pain of losing you. Hey, Vicky shouted. Marcus ignored her. His eyes were locked on mine, pleading, desperate, full of the charm that had fooled me for 18 years. We can fix this, he said. We can figure something out. The insurance money, I'll give it back. Every penny. The house, it's still yours. It's always been yours. Vicky can leave, we can get an annulment, and everything can go back to the way it was. No, Elena, no, nothing goes back. Not after this. You didn't just cheat on me, Marcus. You didn't just move on too quickly. You killed me. You forged documents and bribed officials and created an entire fiction of my death. Also, you could steal what was mine. And you did it with a smile on your face. You did it while I was lying in a hospital bed, calling your name in my sleep, wondering why my husband had abandoned me. Tears were streaming down his face now. Real tears or fake ones, I couldn't tell anymore. It didn't matter. What do you want? He asked. What can I do? I'll do anything. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. Here's what's going to happen, I said. I'm going to leave now. I'm going to walk out of this house, my house, and I'm going to disappear for a little while. You're going to spend the next few days wondering when I'm coming back. You're going to wonder if I've gone to the police, or the newspapers, or the insurance company. You're going to lie awake at night, listening for sirens, checking your phone for alerts, waiting for the knock on the door that ends everything. Elena, please. And when I do come back, it won't be alone. I'll have lawyers and evidence and enough documentation to bury you under the prison. But until then, you get to live with the uncertainty. The way I lived with it for 6 months, wondering if my husband still loved me, wondering why he wouldn't answer my calls. I turned to leave. Wait! Marcus scrambled to his feet. Where are you going? Where will you stay? I looked back at him one last time. I'm going to stay with family, I said. You remember family, don't you, Marcus? The people who actually show up when you're dying? I walked out of the bedroom, down the stairs. Through the kitchen I no longer recognized. out the service entrance into the gray March afternoon. And as I walked down the driveway of the mansion I had grown up in, the mansion my husband had tried to steal from my corpse, I made myself a promise. Marcus thought he had seen a ghost. He had no idea how haunted his life was about to become. The walk to the main road was longer than I remembered. My legs ached with every step, a reminder of the months I had spent learning to use them again. But I didn't slow down. I couldn't. If I stopped now, I might never start again. At the end of the driveway, a black sedan was waiting. Gerald Patterson stepped out of the driver's seat, his face a mixture of relief and concern. "Is it done?" he asked. "It started." "Did he recognize you?" I almost laughed. Eventually, after he fainted. Gerald shook his head. "Elena, I still think we should have gone straight to the authorities. This game you're playing, it's not a game," I said. "It's an education. I'm going to learn exactly who my husband is, and then I'm going to teach him a lesson he'll never forget." We drove to a hotel in Stamford, far enough from Greenwich that no one would recognize me, close enough that I could return when the time was right. Gerald had booked a suite under his secretary's name, cash only, no paper trail. In the elevator, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored walls, the shapeless clothes, the unflattering haircut, the gaunt face that looked 10 years older than I felt. I looked like a ghost. Soon, I would become something much worse. In my hotel room, I spread out the documents Gerald had gathered. Bank statements showing the withdrawals from my trust fund. A copy of the fraudulent death certificate signed by a doctor I had never met. Photographs of Marcus and Vicky at charity events, at restaurants, at my mother's grave. They had visited my mother's grave. They had stood on the ground where my mother was buried and posed for pictures like tourists at a landmark. Something cold settled in my chest, something that felt like winter. I had come back from the dead to reclaim my life. Now I understood that reclaiming wasn't enough. I needed to destroy theirs. The phone rang. It was a burner phone Gerald had given me, untraceable, unknown. Only one person had the number. "Elena," it was Gerald. "We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "I just got a call from a colleague at the county clerk's office. Marcus filed something this morning, before you arrived at the house." "What did he file?" There was a long pause. "He's filed for accelerated probate. He's trying to have your estate settled within 30 days. And as part of that filing, he's declared that the mansion needs to be sold immediately to cover outstanding debts." The mansion. My great-grandfather's mansion, the only home I had ever known. "He's selling my house," I said. The words tasted like ash. "He's trying to. The probate court would have to approve, and normally, that takes months. But Marcus has connections. He's been making donations to the right judges for years. If he can push this through, then by the time I prove I'm alive, there will be nothing left to prove." Essentially, yes. I sat down on the edge of the bed. The cold thing in my chest grew colder. How much time do we have? If everything goes his way, maybe 2 weeks, maybe less. 2 weeks. 14 days to stop my husband from erasing me completely. 14 days to prove that the woman in that grave was a fiction, and the woman in this hotel room was very, very real. "Gerald," I said slowly, "I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to not do anything. Not yet. Don't file papers. Don't contact the authorities. Don't tell anyone I'm alive. Elena, what are you? I'm going back. Not as Elena. Not as the wife who came back from the dead. I'm going back as no one. As a stranger. As exactly who they think I am. I don't understand." I looked at my reflection in the dark window. Ghost eyes stared back at me. "They think I'm a maid," I said. "They think I'm a poor, sick woman who wandered in off the street. They don't know who I really am, and they won't believe Marcus when he tells them." "Why wouldn't they believe him?" I smiled. The cold thing in my chest had settled now, had become something solid and sharp. "Because I'm going to make sure they think he's losing his mind." The plan formed in my head like ice crystals growing on glass. It was elegant, it was cruel, and it was exactly what my husband deserved. "I'm going to go back," I said. I'm going to pretend to be exactly who they accused me of being: a homeless woman, a charity case, a distant relative in need. I'm going to let them humiliate me. I'm going to let them treat me like a servant in my own home. And while they're busy looking down on me, I'm going to document everything. Every conversation, every transaction, every piece of evidence I need to put them both in prison. Elena, this is dangerous. If Marcus realizes what you're doing, he won't. He can't afford to. Think about it, Gerald. If Marcus tells people his dead wife is alive and living in his house, what happens? The insurance company investigates. The police ask questions. His whole scheme collapses. But he saw you. He knows you're not dead. He knows. But he can't prove it without admitting what he did. And if he admits what he did, he goes to prison. The only way for Marcus to survive is to pretend I'm exactly who I said I am. A confused stranger who looks like his dead wife. He has to convince Vicky. He has to convince himself. He has to keep the lie going, because the moment the lie stops, his life ends. Gerald was quiet for a long moment. You've thought this through. I've had 6 months with nothing to do but think. Now, are you going to help me, or are you going to keep trying to talk me out of it? Another pause. Then, what do you need? I need identification for someone who doesn't exist. A driver's license, a social security card, something that makes me look real. I need clothes that make me look poor. And I need you to find out everything you can about Victoria Sinclair. Who she is, where she came from, and what she wants badly enough to marry a man who killed his wife. I'll have it by morning. And Gerald, one more thing. Yes? The house, the sale. I need to know who the buyer is. Because if Marcus is trying to sell my home out from under me, I want to know exactly who I'm going to be stopping. I hung up the phone and sat in the darkness of my hotel room, listening to the hum of traffic outside the window. Tomorrow, I would go back. I would put on my costume of poverty and grief, and I would walk into my own home as a stranger. I would let them treat me like garbage. I would let them dress me in a maid's uniform and order me to clean their toilets and serve their food. And I would watch. I would listen. I would wait, because Marcus thought he had buried me. He had no idea I was about to dig his grave. The next morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror at the Stamford Hotel and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Gerald had worked through the night. He'd sent a courier with everything I needed. A Connecticut driver's license identifying me as Maria Santos, age 45, resident of Bridgeport, a social security card, a prepaid cell phone, and a small suitcase filled with clothes from Goodwill. Faded cardigans, worn slacks, shoes with scuffed heels. I dressed carefully, each piece of clothing a layer of armor in reverse. Instead of protecting me, these clothes made me invisible. They transformed me from Elena Carrington, heiress to a real estate fortune, into Maria Santos, a woman the world had forgotten to notice. I added the final touches. No makeup. Hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized how thin my face had become. A slight hunch to my shoulders that made me look defeated. A rosary around my neck, the kind that suggested I spent my Sundays in church, praying for better days that never came. When I was finished, even I didn't see Elena in the mirror. Perfect. Gerald drove me to the mansion, parking half a mile away on a side road that the neighbors never used. Are you sure about this? He asked for the 10th time. I'm sure. If anything goes wrong, if Marcus tries to hurt you, if you feel unsafe for even a second, then I'll call you. But it won't come to that. Marcus is many things, but he's not violent. He's a coward. Cowards don't attack threats. They run from them. And right now, he's too busy trying to figure out how to save himself to worry about hurting me. Gerald handed me a small device, no bigger than a button. Wear this. It's a recording device, state of the art. It will capture everything within 20 feet. I pinned it to the inside of my cardigan, where it looked like a loose thread. One more thing. Gerald pulled out a manila folder. The information you asked for, on Victoria Sinclair. I opened it and began to read. Victoria Ann Sinclair, born in Dayton, Ohio. Parents divorced when she was 6. Mother remarried 3 times. each husband wealthier than the last. Father disappeared when she was 12, leaving behind gambling debts and a mountain of unpaid child support. Vicky had learned from her mother. She dated her way through college, graduating with a degree in interior design and a reputation for targeting married men. Her first client had been a hedge fund manager who left his wife after 6 months. Her second was a real estate developer who bought her a condo in Miami. Her third was a retired CEO who died mysteriously, leaving her $200,000 in his will despite knowing her for only 4 months. And then there was Marcus. According to Gerald's research, Vicky had met my husband at a charity gala 3 years ago, while I was still healthy, still present, still very much alive. They had been photographed together at various events, always with innocent explanations. She was his interior designer, his consultant, his friend's daughter, his nothing. But the dates told a different story. Vicky had started visiting our home 18 months before my accident. She had been present at dinner parties I couldn't attend because I was too tired. Tired because Marcus had been slipping something into my evening tea. She had accompanied him on business trips to New York while I stayed home with migraines that no doctor could explain. The accident hadn't started this affair. The affair had started long before. And as I read the police report from my crash, I noticed something I had missed before. The truck driver who hit me had been drinking, but he hadn't fallen asleep at the wheel. He had swerved directly into my lane. Witnesses reported that he had been following my car for miles before the impact. The driver had died at the scene. His family had received a large settlement from his employer's insurance company. The employer was a shell company based in Delaware. The shell company was owned by another shell company in the Cayman Islands. And that company, according to Gerald's forensic accountant, had received a wire transfer of $500,000 from an account Marcus controlled. 3 days before my accident. I closed the folder. My hands were steady. My heart was ice. Marcus hadn't just tried to steal my money after my accident. He had caused the accident. He had paid someone to kill me. And when the killer failed, when I survived against all odds, he had simply finished the job with paperwork instead of violence. My husband was a murderer, and I was about to move back into his house. I walked up the driveway slowly, carrying a small bag with my belongings, a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a worn Bible that Gerald had bought at a used bookstore. I looked like exactly what I was pretending to be: a poor relation, a burden, a charity case. The front door opened before I reached it. Marcus stood in the doorway, his face a mask of controlled panic. He had aged 10 years overnight. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hair uncombed. He was wearing the same clothes he'd had on yesterday, minus the towel. "You came back," he said. "You invited me." I kept my voice soft, uncertain, nothing like my own. "Yesterday. You said I could stay. You said I was family." His jaw tightened. I could see him thinking, calculating, trying to figure out his next move. "About yesterday," he said slowly. "I think there was some confusion when I said I was your wife." I laughed, a small, embarrassed sound. "I'm so sorry about that. I don't know what came over me. I think I was confused from the medication. I'm your cousin, Maria." "Maria Santos?" "Elena's cousin from her father's side. We met once, at a funeral, many years ago. You probably don't remember." Relief flooded his face. He believed me. Or rather, he wanted to believe me, which was almost the same thing. "Maria," he repeated, tasting the name. "Yes. Yes, of course. I remember now. You look so much like her. Like Elena. It was a shock." "I know. People always said we could be twins. That's why I came to visit, when I heard about her passing, to pay my respects. But when I got here, I became confused. The medication I take, for my nerves, you understand, it sometimes makes me say things I don't mean." Marcus nodded eagerly. Of course. These medications can be very powerful. You must be careful with them." "I try, but I have no one to help me. No family left." When I heard Elena was gone, I let my voice trail off, let my eyes fill with tears. I thought perhaps I could stay here for a while, just until I get back on my feet. I could help around the house. I'm a very good cleaner, very quiet. You would barely know I was here. I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. If he let me stay, he could control me, monitor me, make sure I didn't tell anyone what I had said yesterday. If he sent me away, I might go to the police, the newspapers, the insurance company. Better to keep me close. Better to keep me where he could see me. Of course you can stay, he said, forcing warmth into his voice. Family is always welcome. We have a room in the servants' quarters. Nothing fancy, but clean and comfortable. You can stay as long as you like. Oh, thank you. I clasped my hands together, like a grateful peasant in a fairy tale. You are too kind, too generous. Elena always said you were a good man. The lie tasted like copper in my mouth, but I smiled through it. Marcus led me inside, past the rooms I had decorated, past the furniture I had chosen, past the art I had collected. He spoke in the patronizing tone people use with children and the mentally ill. This is the kitchen. You can eat breakfast here before Vicky wakes up. She prefers to sleep late. This is the laundry room. I'm sure you know how to use these machines. And this, he opened a door to a narrow staircase, leads to the servants' quarters. The servants' quarters. In the house my great-grandfather built, in the home where I had taken my first steps. I followed him up the stairs, memorizing every creak, every shadow, every potential escape route. The hallway at the top was narrow and poorly lit. There were 3 doors, all closed. This will be your room. Marcus opened the middle door to reveal a space barely larger than a closet. A single bed with a thin mattress, a wooden chair, a small window that looked out onto the back garden. No closet, no bathroom, just bare walls and bare floors and the smell of neglect. It's perfect, I said, more than I deserve. Marcus smiled, a genuine smile, I think, born from the satisfaction of seeing his wife's cousin reduced to sleeping in the servants' quarters of her own family home. I'll leave you to settle in. Vicky will want to meet you properly when she wakes up, and we'll need to discuss your duties. If you're going to stay here, you'll need to earn your keep. Of course, whatever you need, I'm very good at cleaning and cooking, and I never complain. He patted my shoulder, the kind of pat you give a dog that has learned a new trick, and closed the door behind him. I stood in the center of my tiny room and breathed. I was inside. I was invisible, and I was angry enough to burn this house to the ground. But first, I had work to do. I unpacked my meager belongings, placing the Bible prominently on the nightstand where anyone who entered would see it. I hid the recording device in the waistband of my skirt, where it would be secure during whatever tasks they assigned me. I slipped the burner phone under the mattress, within reach but out of sight. Then I sat on the bed and waited. An hour later, the door opened without a knock. Vicky stood in the doorway, wearing yoga pants and one of my cashmere sweaters. Her hair was pulled up in a messy bun, and her face was free of makeup. Without the war paint, she looked younger and meaner. So, she said, looking me up and down like merchandise at a discount store. You're the cousin. Yes, ma'am, Maria Santos. I'm so grateful for your hospitality. Don't call me Mom. It makes me feel old. She stepped into the room, not bothering to hide her disgust at the small space. Marcus told me about your confusion yesterday, about how you thought you were his wife. I'm so embarrassed about that. The medication? Save it. She held up her hand. I don't care why you said it. I care that you don't say it again, to anyone, ever. Do you understand? Yes, of course, I would never. Good. She tossed something at me. I caught it reflexively. It was a uniform, a gray dress with a white apron, the kind housekeepers wore in old movies. You'll wear this when you're working, which is whenever you're not sleeping. Breakfast is at 8, lunch is at 1, dinner is at 7. You'll serve all meals and clean up afterward. You'll also clean the bathrooms, do the laundry, and take care of the gardens. Any questions? I looked at the uniform in my hands. My grandmother had employed housekeepers who wore uniforms like this. She had treated them with respect, like members of the family. She would have been horrified to see her great-granddaughter holding the same gray fabric. "No questions," I said quietly. "I'm just grateful to have a roof over my head." Vicky smiled. It was the smile of a cat who has cornered a mouse. "One more thing," she said. "You're not allowed in the master bedroom, or the study, or the wine cellar, or the second floor at all, unless you're called. You stay in the kitchen, the laundry room, and this room. Anywhere else, and you're out on the street. Understood?" "Understood." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "You really do look like her," she said, her voice almost thoughtful. "Like Elena. It's unsettling." "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize." Her smile returned, sharper now. "Just remember, she's dead. I'm the Mrs. Carrington now, and you're the help." She closed the door, and I was alone with my fury. I changed into the uniform slowly, methodically, buttoning each button like a soldier preparing for war. The fabric was cheap and scratchy against my skin. The apron was too small, cutting into my waist. The whole ensemble was designed to humiliate, to transform the wearer into something less than human. I looked at myself in the small window's reflection. I looked like a maid, like a servant, like nobody. Perfect. I descended the narrow stairs to the kitchen, where Marcus was sitting at the breakfast nook, reading something on his phone. He barely looked up when I entered. "There's coffee on the counter," he said. "Make yourself something to eat. Simple things only. We need to save the good food for meals." I poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot, the same coffee maker I had bought in Rome on our 10th anniversary, and found a piece of bread in the pantry. I ate standing up, like a servant would. "I need you to start with the bathrooms," Marcus said, still not looking at me. "There are cleaning supplies under the sink. And be thorough. Vicky is very particular." "Yes, sir." He finally looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Perhaps he hadn't expected me to be so compliant. Perhaps he had been hoping for resistance, for something that would justify throwing me out. "Good," he said after a moment. "Good. I think this arrangement will work out fine." I finished my bread and went to find the cleaning supplies. The next 3 hours were an education in humiliation. I cleaned 4 bathrooms. I scrubbed toilets and sinks and floors on my hands and knees. I wiped down mirrors and polished fixtures until they gleamed. I organized cabinets and replaced toilet paper rolls and folded towels into the precise shapes that Vicky had apparently seen in a magazine somewhere. Each bathroom was harder than the last. Not because of the work, but because of what I saw. In the guest bathroom, I found my mother's antique soap dishes, the ones she had collected from every country she visited. Vicky had filled them with cheap plastic soaps from the drugstore. In the powder room, I found the hand towels my grandmother had embroidered, delicate linens with our family monogram. Vicky had bleached them so badly that the thread was starting to unravel. In the third bathroom, I found something worse. It was a medicine cabinet, and inside were prescription bottles with my name on them. Elena Carrington, alprazolam, zolpidem, trazodone, all prescribed by a doctor I had never met, all filled at a pharmacy I had never visited. These were the medications that Marcus had been slipping into my tea. The ones that made me tired and confused and unwell for months before my accident. The ones that made everyone think I was losing my mind. He hadn't just tried to kill me once. He had been poisoning me for months, maybe years, preparing the groundwork for my eventual death. Making sure that when I disappeared, everyone would nod sadly and say, "Well, she was always fragile, wasn't she?" I photographed the bottles with my burner phone. Then I put them back exactly as I had found them and continued cleaning. Lunch was a lesson in servitude. Vicky sat at the head of the dining table, my mother's table, the one that had hosted 3 generations of Carrington holidays, and demanded a Caesar salad with grilled chicken. "Dressing on the side," she said without looking at me. "And make sure the chicken isn't dry. Marcus ruined it last time." I made the salad. I grilled the chicken perfectly, I served it on my grandmother's china and watched Vicky take one bite before pushing the plate away. "Too much lemon," she said. "Take it away. I'm not hungry anymore." I took the plate to the kitchen and ate the salad standing over the sink. It was the best thing I had tasted in months. The afternoon was dedicated to laundry. 7 loads. Sheets, towels, delicates, darks, lights, hand wash only, dry clean only. Vicky appeared every hour to check on my progress and criticize whatever she found. "These sheets aren't soft enough. Run them through again with more fabric softener. You folded these towels wrong. Watch a YouTube video and learn how to do it properly. This is cashmere. It needs to be laid flat to dry. Are you trying to ruin my things?" Her things. My mother's cashmere sweater. The one she bought in Scotland the year I was born. I said nothing. I fixed everything. I smiled and nodded and played the part of the grateful, stupid, disposable woman they believed me to be. By dinner, I was exhausted. My back ached. My hands were raw from chemicals. My feet throbbed from hours of standing. But I had also learned something valuable. Marcus and Vicky were planning to host a party. I had overheard them discussing it during lunch, a small gathering to celebrate their new chapter. 50 guests, catered food, a string quartet in the garden. The party was scheduled for Saturday, 5 days from now. They were going to celebrate their stolen life in my family's home, surrounded by the same people who had attended my funeral. And I was going to be there, invisible in my maid's uniform, serving canapes and collecting evidence. That night, after dinner was served and cleaned up, after I had scrubbed the final pot and swept the final floor, I climbed the narrow stairs to my tiny room and collapsed on the thin mattress. I called Gerald from my burner phone. "How bad is it?" he asked. "Worse than I thought." I told him about the party, about the medication in the cabinet, about the shell company and the truck driver and everything I had found. Gerald was silent for a long moment. "Elena," he finally said, "what Marcus did, if we can prove it, it's not just fraud. It's attempted murder. Possibly conspiracy to commit murder. The penalties, I know. He could face life in prison. I know. And you're living in his house, sleeping 30 feet from his bedroom. If he realizes what you're doing, he won't. You can't know that. I know Marcus. I was married to him for 18 years. He's too arrogant to believe that anyone could outthink him, especially a woman. Especially a poor, confused woman in a maid's uniform. He looks at me and sees nothing. That's exactly what I want him to see." Gerald sighed. "The party, what are you planning?" "I don't know yet, but it has to be public. It has to be undeniable. It has to be the kind of thing that can't be spun or covered up or explained away. And if it goes wrong?" I looked at the ceiling of my tiny room, at the water stains and the peeling paint, at the home my family had built, now housing the people who had tried to destroy me. "If it goes wrong," I said, "then at least I'll know I tried. At least I won't have died wondering what might have been." "You're not going to die, Elena." "No," I agreed. "I'm not. But Marcus might wish he had." I hung up the phone and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I would continue my performance. I would clean and cook and serve. I would smile and nod and say, "Yes, ma'am," and "Of course, sir." I would be invisible. And every night, when they slept in my bed and drank my wine and wore my clothes, I would be documenting, recording, planning. The party was in 5 days. By Saturday night, everyone would know the truth. And Marcus would realize that the ghost he created was about to become very, very real. The days blurred together, like watercolors in rain. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Each morning, I woke before dawn, dressed in my humiliating uniform, and descended to the kitchen to prepare breakfast for the people who had stolen my life. Each night, I collapsed onto my thin mattress, body aching, spirit burning, one day closer to the moment of truth. But it was Thursday evening that changed everything. I was serving dinner, rack of lamb, my grandmother's recipe, though neither Marcus nor Vicky had any idea where it came from, when I heard something that made my blood run cold. "The buyer is getting impatient," Marcus said. cutting into his meat without looking up. He wants to close by the end of the month. Vicky sipped her wine, my wine. A 2005 Chateau Margaux that I had been saving for a special occasion. Can't we push it? This party is already stressful enough without dealing with real estate nonsense. It's not nonsense. It's $12 million. Marcus finally looked up, his expression hard. The mansion, the grounds, everything. Once the sale goes through, we're set for life. We can go anywhere. Start over. Leave all of this behind. My hands trembled as I refilled Vicky's water glass. $12 million. The home my great-grandfather built, reduced to a number on a contract. But I like this house, Vicky pouted. I've put so much work into redecorating. The new furniture, the gym, You can redecorate wherever we go next. Monaco, the Maldives, anywhere you want. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. Think about it, baby. A fresh start. No ghosts, no memories, just us. No ghosts. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Fine, Vicky sighed. But we're keeping the art. Elena had good taste. I'll give her that. Those paintings are worth a fortune. I stood in the corner, invisible, listening to them carve up my life like the lamb on their plates. They were going to sell my home, take my art, and disappear to some tropical paradise where extradition was complicated and consciences were optional. Not if I could help it. After dinner, while they retired to the living room to watch television on the massive screen that had replaced my mother's portrait, I slipped into the study. Vicky had forbidden me from entering this room, but Vicky was 3 glasses of wine into her evening, and unlikely to check on the help. I had maybe 20 minutes before Marcus would wander in for his nightly brandy. The study had been my father's favorite room. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with first editions and leather-bound classics that had been in our family for generations. The 4th wall was dominated by a large window that overlooked the rose garden my mother had planted the year I was born. Most of the books were gone now. In their place were golf trophies, framed photographs of Marcus at various charity events, and a collection of expensive whiskey bottles that I had never seen before. But the desk was the same. My father's desk, the one he had inherited from his father, the one where he had written his will, the one where I had sat on his lap as a child and listened to him talk about the importance of family. The desk had a secret. When I was 7 years old, my father showed me a hidden compartment in the bottom drawer. Our family has always kept secrets, he had said with a wink. Sometimes the most important things need to be protected. I had forgotten about that compartment for decades. But as I stood in the study that night, surrounded by the remnants of my stolen life, the memory came flooding back. I opened the bottom drawer. It was full of Marcus's papers, bills, receipts, correspondence with lawyers. I removed everything carefully, noting the exact position of each document so I could replace them perfectly. At the back of the drawer, hidden behind a false panel that looked like ordinary wood, was the compartment. I pressed the hidden latch, and the panel swung open. Inside was a folder, old, yellowed, tied with a faded ribbon, and on the front, in my father's handwriting, for Elena, in case of emergency. My hands shook as I untied the ribbon. The folder contained documents I had never seen before, my father's private papers, hidden from everyone, including, apparently, my husband. The first document was a copy of my parents' prenuptial agreement. I had known such an agreement existed, but I had never read it. The terms were straightforward. All Carrington family assets were to remain under Carrington family control. In the event of divorce, any spouse would leave with only what they had brought into the marriage. But there was a codicil at the bottom that I had never known about. In the event of death, disappearance, or incapacitation of Elena Carrington, all assets shall be frozen pending a full investigation by the family's legal representatives. No transactions may occur without the express written consent of the Carrington Family Trust, represented by Gerald Patterson or his designated successor. Marcus had never known about this codicil. If he had, he would never have tried to sell the house. He would have known that any sale would be automatically invalid, that the money would never reach him, no matter how many documents he forged. Gerald had known. Gerald had been waiting for the right moment to spring the trap. I kept reading. The second document was a letter from my father to me, written in his careful handwriting, dated 2 weeks before he died. My darling Elena, if you are reading this, then something has gone wrong. I have always trusted your judgment, but I have also always worried about the men who circle our family like sharks around a wounded seal. You are the last Carrington. When you marry, you will bring someone new into our family's legacy. I pray that he will be worthy of your love. But if he is not, if he proves to be the kind of man who values money over loyalty, wealth over love, then I have left you the tools to protect yourself. The documents in this folder will help you reclaim everything that is rightfully yours. The prenuptial codicil ensures that no spouse can steal what generations of Carringtons have built. The forensic accounts will reveal any financial irregularities. And the letter from Judge Harmon confirms that any court in Connecticut will honor our family's wishes over any marriage contract that attempts to supersede them. I hope you never need these documents. I hope the man you choose is worthy of the trust you will place in him. But if he is not, remember this. You are a Carrington. We do not surrender. We do not forgive. And we do not forget. With all my love, your father. I sat in my father's chair, holding the letter, and cried for the first time since leaving the hospital. Not tears of sadness, tears of gratitude, tears of rage, tears of the overwhelming realization that my father had known. He had seen what I couldn't see. He had prepared for the exact scenario that was now playing out decades before it happened. Marcus thought he was smarter than everyone. He thought he had covered every angle, planned for every contingency, eliminated every threat. He had never planned for a father's love. I photographed every document with my burner phone. Then I replaced them exactly as I had found them, closed the secret compartment, and returned Marcus's papers to the drawer. I slipped out of the study just as I heard his footsteps in the hallway. Maria? His voice was suspicious. What are you doing up here? I turned, making my face a mask of subservience. I'm sorry, sir. I was looking for the guest bathroom. I got confused. This house is so big. He studied me for a long moment. I could see him trying to decide if I was lying, if I had seen something I shouldn't have, if I was a threat. The guest bathroom is downstairs, he said finally. Off the kitchen, where you belong. Of course, I'm so sorry. It won't happen again? I hurried past him, keeping my eyes down, playing the part of the embarrassed servant. But as I descended the stairs, I could feel his gaze on my back like a cold hand. He was getting suspicious. I needed to move faster. That night, I called Gerald and told him everything. The codicil, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I drafted that document myself, 40 years ago. Your father made me promise never to tell anyone about it, not even you, unless it became absolutely necessary. Why didn't you tell me before, when Marcus first started stealing? Because the codicil only activates under specific circumstances: death, disappearance, or incapacitation. As long as you were alive and well, it was dormant. But now, he paused. Now Marcus has declared you dead. He has activated the very protection your father designed to destroy him. So the house sale, invalid, void from the moment he signed the papers. Any court in Connecticut will throw it out, and Marcus will face additional charges of fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. I laughed. A real laugh. Not the bitter sound I had grown accustomed to. There's more, I said. I told him about the shell company, the truck driver, the $500,000 wire transfer, the medications in the cabinet. Gerald was silent for a long time. Elena, he finally said, this isn't just fraud anymore. This is attempted murder, conspiracy, racketeering possibly. If we can prove what you're saying, I can prove it. I have photos. I have recordings. I have the documents from my father's hidden compartment. And I have 2 more days to collect even more evidence. The party. 50 of Marcus's closest friends and associates, all gathered in one place. All the people who attended my funeral, who believed his lies, who helped him steal my life. What are you planning? I looked out the window of my tiny room, at the garden where my mother had taught me to plant roses, at the house where 4 generations of my family had lived and loved and built something lasting. I'm planning a resurrection, I said, and everyone is invited. Friday was a whirlwind of preparation. The party was tomorrow, and Vicky was in full event planning mode. She had hired a catering company, a florist, a string quartet, and a bartender, but that didn't stop her from treating me like her personal assistant. Maria, polish the silver. Maria, iron the tablecloths. Maria, arrange the flowers. Maria, taste the canapes and tell me if they're too salty. I did everything she asked, smiling through each humiliation, counting down the hours until my revenge. But there was one task that Vicky didn't ask for, one that I assigned to myself. During my brief break in the afternoon, while Vicky was meeting with the caterer and Marcus was on a conference call in the study, I slipped upstairs to the master bedroom. The room had been completely transformed. My antique bed had been replaced with a modern platform monstrosity. My grandmother's armoire had been painted white, destroying the original mahogany finish. My wedding photos had been removed from the dresser, replaced by pictures of Marcus and Vicky at various vacations, Bali, Paris, the Amalfi Coast. But there was one thing Vicky hadn't changed. In the corner of the room, hidden behind a decorative screen, was my grandmother's safe, a small, antique thing built into the wall in 1952 and virtually invisible to anyone who didn't know it was there. The combination was my grandmother's birthday, July 14th, 1920. I turned the dial, 7:14:20. The safe clicked open. Inside was exactly what I had hoped to find. My grandmother's jewelry, not the costume pieces that Vicky wore around the house, but the real treasures. The diamond necklace my grandmother had inherited from her mother, the emerald earrings that had been a gift from my grandfather on their wedding day, the ruby bracelet that had once belonged to a Russian duchess. Marcus had never known about this safe. He had never known about the jewelry. He had sold what he thought was the entire collection, replicas my grandmother had made specifically to fool thieves, and kept the insurance money. But the real jewelry was worth millions, and it was still mine. I took photos of everything. Then I closed the safe and slipped out of the room, my heart pounding with a new kind of excitement. Marcus thought he had stripped me of everything. He thought I would walk away from this marriage with nothing but the clothes on my back. He had no idea how wrong he was. That evening, I overheard something that made my blood freeze. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when Marcus and Vicky's voices drifted in from the dining room. "She's been acting strange," Marcus said. "I found her upstairs yesterday. Said she was looking for the bathroom." "She's harmless," Vicky replied. "Just a sad, confused woman." "You said so yourself." "I know what I said. But there's something about her. The way she looks at me sometimes. Like she knows something." "Knows what?" "That you're a terrible husband who declared his wife dead so he could marry his mistress." "Everyone who matters already knows that, darling. That's why they're coming to our party. To celebrate. Not everyone knows the details. Not everyone knows about the insurance. Or the house sale, or the what?" A long pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear. "I need to tell you something about Elena, about the accident." "What about it?" "It wasn't exactly an accident." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. "What do you mean?" Vicky's voice had changed. There was something new in it. Not surprise, not horror. Something more like curiosity. "I mean, I might have helped things along, made sure she was in the right place at the right time. made sure the driver knew what to do. Marcus. Vicky's voice was calm. Too calm. Are you telling me you had your wife killed? I'm telling you I took care of a problem. A problem that was standing between us and the life we deserve. I waited for Vicky's scream, for her outrage, for her demand that Marcus turn himself in. Instead, I heard laughter. "Oh, Marcus," she said, her voice warm with admiration. "You really do love me, don't you? More than anything. Then let's make sure this party is perfect. Let's celebrate the life we've built, the life you risked everything to give me." They clinked glasses. I heard the sound of a kiss. And I realized that I had been wrong about Victoria Sinclair. She wasn't an ambitious woman who had stumbled into a criminal's arms. She wasn't a victim of Marcus's lies who would turn on him when she learned the truth. She was his partner, his co-conspirator, possibly even the one who had given him the idea in the first place. They had planned my murder together, and now they were celebrating its success. I slid down the kitchen wall until I was sitting on the floor, my knees pulled to my chest, my hand clamped over my mouth to keep from screaming. I had been living in a house with two people who had tried to kill me, serving them dinner, cleaning their toilets, smiling at their insults, and they had no idea I was still alive. The terror passed. In its place came something colder, something harder, something that felt like the last piece of a puzzle clicking into place. They had confessed. To each other, yes, but also to me, to the recording device pinned to my uniform, which had captured every word. I had them. I finally, completely, irrevocably had them. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, planning every moment of what would happen tomorrow. The party would begin at 7. 50 guests, friends, associates, and the cream of Greenwich society would gather in the garden I had planted with my mother. They would drink champagne from my cellar, eat canapés from my kitchen, admire the art my family had collected over generations. And then, at exactly 9 o'clock, the ghost of Elena Carrington would make her grand entrance. I had coordinated everything with Gerald. The police would be waiting at the gates, ready to enter on my signal. The insurance company's investigators would be there too, along with a reporter from the Greenwich Gazette who had been skeptical of my death from the beginning. But before the authorities arrived, before the handcuffs came out, before the mugshots and the headlines and the inevitable media circus, I wanted something for myself. I wanted to see their faces. I wanted to watch Marcus realize that the woman he had tried to murder was standing in front of him, alive and powerful, and ready to destroy everything he had built. I wanted to see Vicky understand that the maid she had humiliated was the owner of everything she thought she had stolen. I wanted them to know, in that final moment before their world collapsed, that they had underestimated me, that they had never known me at all. I closed my eyes and imagined their faces, the shock, the terror, the desperate scramble for excuses that would never be believed. Tomorrow, I would not be a ghost. I would be a reckoning. Saturday morning dawned gray and cold, but by noon the clouds had cleared and the sun was shining with almost theatrical perfection. It was as if the universe itself was collaborating with my revenge, providing ideal weather for the most important party of my life. Vicky was frantic. She ran through the house like a general preparing for battle, shouting orders at the caterers, rearranging flowers, and changing her outfit 3 times before lunch. "Maria!" she screamed from the bedroom. "Come help me with my zipper." I climbed the stairs I had climbed 1,000 times before, walked into the bedroom that had been mine for 18 years, and helped my husband's mistress zip up a dress that I had bought in Milan for my anniversary. "How do I look?" she asked, twirling in front of the mirror. I looked at her reflection, at the dress that had cost more than most people's monthly salary, at the jewelry, costume pieces, thank God, that she wore like trophies, at the smug satisfaction in her eyes as she admired the woman she had become. "You look beautiful," I said, "like the lady of the house." She smiled, taking the words as a compliment. They were not. The guests began arriving at 7. I watched from the kitchen window as car after car pulled up the driveway. Mercedes, BMWs, Range Rovers. The vehicles of Greenwich's elite, each one carrying someone who had attended my funeral, who had cried at my empty grave, who had hugged my murderer and offered condolences. I recognized faces. Barbara Whitmore, who had been my college roommate. Thomas Chen, who had served on 3 charity boards with me. The Hendersons, the Montgomerys, the Vanderbergs. Families I had known since childhood, people I had considered friends. They streamed into my garden, accepted champagne from waiters, and began the slow process of mingling and networking that defined every Greenwich party. From a distance, it looked exactly like the dozens of events I had hosted in this same space. Except this time, I was watching from the servants' quarters. At 8 o'clock, Vicky found me in the kitchen. "We need more canapes out there," she said, her voice sharp with stress. "And Marcus wants you to serve drinks in the garden. The bartender is overwhelmed." "Of course, ma'am." She narrowed her eyes. "And try to be invisible, will you? Some of these people knew Elena. The last thing we need is someone noticing how much you look like her. I'll be very discreet." I loaded a tray with champagne flutes and walked out into my garden. The air smelled like roses and expensive perfume. The string quartet was playing Vivaldi. The fairy lights my mother had installed 20 years ago twinkled in the trees, casting soft shadows over the crowd. I moved through the guests like water, offering drinks, collecting empty glasses, keeping my eyes down and my movements efficient. No one looked at me twice. I was exactly what they expected, a servant, a background character, a nobody. But I looked at them. I looked at Barbara Whitmore, who was laughing at something Marcus had said, her hand resting familiarly on his arm. I looked at Thomas Chen, who was deep in conversation with Vicky, his eyes occasionally drifting to her cleavage. I looked at all of them. These people I had trusted. These people I had welcomed into my home. These people who had accepted my husband's lies without question and moved on with their lives while I was fighting to survive in a hospital they didn't even know existed. None of them deserved a warning. None of them deserved mercy, but they were going to get a show. At 8:45, I slipped away from the party and climbed to my tiny room. I had exactly 15 minutes to transform. I had hidden the supplies in my suitcase, brought piece by piece over the past few days. A wig, the same shade as my natural hair before the accident. Makeup, carefully selected to enhance rather than disguise. A dress, not one of my old ones, but something new, something powerful, something that announced to the world that Elena Carrington was not a ghost. I looked in the mirror. For the first time in months, I saw myself. Not the gaunt, defeated woman who had stumbled home from the hospital. Not the invisible servant who had spent a week scrubbing toilets and swallowing insults. But the woman I had been before Marcus tried to destroy me. And the woman I had become after. I was thinner than I used to be. My face was sharper. There was something in my eyes that hadn't been there before. Something hard, something cold, something that looked like it might never forgive. Good. I didn't want to forgive. I wanted to win. At exactly 9 o'clock, I descended the main staircase of my family home. The party was in full swing. Through the open French doors, I could see the garden full of guests, their laughter and conversation drifting into the house like music. Marcus was standing near the fountain, a glass of whiskey in his hand, surrounded by a group of men I recognized as his business partners. Vicky was nowhere to be seen, probably touching up her makeup, preparing for the toast Marcus had planned for 9:30. I walked through the living room, through the foyer, through the open doors, and out into the garden. I walked slowly, deliberately, each step a declaration. The first person to notice me was Barbara Whitmore. She had been reaching for a canapé when her hand froze in midair. Her face went white. "Elena?" she whispered. The name spread through the crowd like ripples in a pond. Elena. 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 Heads turned. Conversations stopped. The string quartet faltered, then fell silent. I kept walking. Toward the fountain. Toward my husband. Toward the moment I had been waiting for since I woke up in that hospital bed and discovered that the man I loved had tried to kill me. Marcus saw me. His face went through the same transformations I had seen a week ago when I first confronted him in the bedroom. Confusion, recognition, horror. But this time, there was something new in his eyes. Fear. Not the fear of being caught, not the fear of consequences. The primal, animal fear of seeing something that should not exist. "Hello, Marcus," I said. My voice carried across the silent garden. "Did you miss me?" He dropped his whiskey glass. It shattered on the flagstones, spraying expensive bourbon across his Italian shoes. "Elena?" His voice cracked. You're dead?" I smiled. "That's what you told everyone, isn't it? That I died in that accident you arranged? That I succumbed to my injuries in some anonymous hospital where no one could visit? That my body was cremated before anyone could demand to see it?" The crowd murmured. I could see people reaching for their phones, recording, texting, spreading the word. Let them. I wanted witnesses. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said, his voice steadying as his survival instincts kicked in. "You're clearly confused. You're not Elena. Elena is dead. I buried her. You buried an empty casket." I took another step toward him. "I have the photographs. I have the witnesses. I have the forged death certificate signed by a doctor who was paid $50,000 to lie." Marcus looked around wildly, searching for support, for escape, for someone who might believe him. But the faces of his guests were closed, wary, already beginning to distance themselves from the man who had just been accused of murder. "And I have something else," I continued. "I have a recording from last night when you told your wife, your second wife, the one you married while I was still alive, exactly how you arranged my accident, how you paid the truck driver, how you transferred $500,000 through a shell company in the Caymans." The crowd gasped. Someone dropped a champagne glass. The string quartet violinist was openly recording on her phone. "That's a lie," Marcus shouted. "I never said anything like that. This woman is insane. She's been stalking me for weeks, pretending to be some poor relative, and now she's making up stories." "Really?" I pulled out my phone and pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the garden. "It wasn't exactly an accident." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I might have helped things along. Made sure she was in the right place at the right time. Made sure the driver knew what to do." The recording played on, capturing every word of his confession, every damning syllable of his admission to murder. And when Vicky's laughter came through the speakers, that warm, admiring laugh at the revelation that her husband had killed for her, the crowd's murmurs became shouts of outrage. Marcus lunged for my phone. I stepped back, and suddenly Gerald was there, stepping between us, his hand raised. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mr. Carrington," Gerald said calmly. "The police are already on their way. Any further actions will only make things worse for you." As if on cue, I heard sirens in the distance, getting closer. Marcus turned in a circle, trapped, desperate, searching for any escape. But there was no escape. His guests had backed away, forming a ring around him like spectators at an execution. His business partners were already murmuring to each other, already calculating how to distance themselves from the fallout. Even the caterers had stopped working, watching the drama unfold with open fascination. "Where's Vicky?" someone asked. I looked toward the house, and there she was, standing in the doorway of the French doors, frozen in place, her face a mask of horror. She had heard everything. The confession, the recording, the revelation that her husband was about to be arrested for attempting to murder his wife. Our eyes met across the garden. "Hello, Vicky," I said. "Or should I call you Mrs. Carrington?" "Oh, wait, that would be me." She ran. It was almost comical. The woman who had spent a week treating me like a servant, who had made me scrub her toilets and iron her blouses, now fleeing through my house in a desperate attempt to escape. She didn't get far. 2 police officers met her at the front door. I heard her scream, A high, thin sound like a tea kettle reaching its limit, and then silence. In the garden, Marcus was on his knees, not in surrender, but in collapse. His legs had simply given out beneath him. He was muttering something over and over, but I couldn't hear what it was. I walked closer. "I loved you," he was saying. "I loved you. I loved you." I crouched down until my face was level with his, until I could see the tears streaming down his cheeks, the snot running from his nose, the complete dissolution of the man who had once charmed me into believing he was my soulmate. "No, Marcus," I said softly. "You loved my money. You loved my house. You loved the idea of being a Carrington without doing any of the work. But you never loved me. If you had, you never could have done what you did." The police arrived. There were 4 of them, led by a detective I had met with earlier in the week. They walked through the garden with the calm efficiency of professionals, ignoring the stunned crowd, heading straight for the man on his knees. "Marcus Carrington," the detective said, "you are under arrest for insurance fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." They hauled him to his feet, handcuffed him, led him through the garden, past his guests, past the fountain, past the roses my mother had planted. As he passed me, he stopped. The officers tried to move him forward, but he resisted, turning to face me one last time. "This isn't over," he said. His voice was steady now, cold with rage. "I have lawyers. I have connections. I will fight this, and I will win. And when you do, what?" I stepped closer, until we were nearly nose to nose. "You'll kill me again? Try. You've already failed twice. And this time, the whole world is watching." I gestured to the crowd, to the phones recording every moment, to the reporter from the Greenwich Gazette who was furiously taking notes. "You're not going to prison quietly, Marcus. You're going to prison famously. Every news outlet in the country is going to run this story. Every person you've ever lied to, cheated, stolen from, they're all going to know exactly who you are. And when you get out, if you get out, there won't be a corner of the earth where you can hide from what you've done." The officers pulled him away. I watched them march him through my garden, past my fountain, down my driveway, toward the waiting police cars. And then he was gone. The silence that followed was almost sacred. 50 people stood in my garden, frozen like statues in a museum of betrayal. No one moved, no one spoke. They just stared at me, at the woman who had risen from her own grave to destroy the man who put her there. I could have said something, could have explained, justified, narrated the entire saga for their benefit, but I didn't. Let them wonder, let them piece together the fragments from what they had witnessed. Let them spend the rest of their lives telling this story at cocktail parties and holiday dinners. "Elena?" Barbara Whitmore stepped forward, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Elena, I had no idea. None of us did. If we had known, would you have looked for me?" I asked. "Would you have questioned why my body was never shown at the viewing? Would you have wondered why the hospital refused to release my medical records? Would you have done anything at all, Barbara? Or would you have accepted the convenient lie because it was easier than seeking the truth?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. That's what I thought. I turned to face the crowd. You all attended my funeral. You all gave speeches about what a wonderful person I was. You all hugged my husband and told him how sorry you were for his loss. And then you went home and forgot about me. "We didn't forget," Thomas Chen started. "Yes, you did. And I understand why. Death is uncomfortable. Grief is inconvenient. It was easier to accept the story you were told and move on with your lives." I paused, letting the words sink in. "I'm not here to blame you for that. I'm here to remind you that the story you were told was a lie. And the man who told it is now on his way to prison." Gerald appeared at my elbow. "Elena, the detective wants to speak with you. And there are reporters at the gate." I nodded. "Of course there are." I turned to leave, but Barbara's voice stopped me. "What happens now?" she asked. "To the house? To everything?" I look back at my childhood home, at the fairy lights twinkling in the garden, at the roses my mother had planted, at the fountain where I had made wishes as a child. Now, I said, I start over. The next few hours were a blur of statements and questions and paperwork. I sat in my own living room, my living room, for the first time in months, and answered the detective's questions while Gerald took notes and the party guests slowly dispersed. Their evening of celebration transformed into something they would never forget. I told the detective everything. About the accident, about waking up in the Vermont facility, about discovering the newspaper article that revealed my own death, about returning home and finding Vicky in my bedroom, wearing my clothes, living my life. I told them about the shell company in Delaware, about the wire transfer to the Cayman Islands, about the truck driver who had been paid to kill me and died in the process, about the medications in the cabinet and the forged prescriptions and the months of poisoning that had preceded the crash. And I played them the recording, the confession, the laughter, the proof that both Marcus and Vicky had known exactly what they were doing. When I finished, the detective, a tired-looking woman named Hernandez, closed her notebook and looked at me with something that might have been respect. "Mrs. Carrington," she said, "in my 23 years on the force, I have never seen anything like this. The planning, the patience, the sheer audacity of what you did." "What I did was survive," I said. "What Marcus did was try to murder his wife for money. Let's make sure we're clear about who the criminal is here." "Of course." She stood, tucking her notebook into her jacket. "We'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to sign your formal statement. And the DA's office will want to talk to you about testifying at trial. I'll be there." After she left, Gerald and I sat alone in the living room. The caterers had packed up and gone. The string quartet had loaded their instruments into a van. The fairy lights still twinkled in the garden, but there was no one left to see them. "You did it," Gerald said. His voice was thick with emotion. "Your father would be so proud." I looked at the spot where my mother's portrait used to hang, at the massive television that had replaced it, at all the small violations that Vicky and Marcus had committed against my family's legacy. "It's not over yet," I said. "There's the trial, the civil suit, the process of undoing everything Marcus did in my name." I paused. "And there's the house. What about it?" I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where my revenge had just played out. "It doesn't feel like home anymore," I said quietly. "He contaminated it. Every room, every piece of furniture, every corner has been touched by what he did, by what she did. I don't know if I can live here anymore." Gerald came to stand beside me. "You don't have to decide anything tonight. The house isn't going anywhere. The sale is void, the ownership is clear, and you have all the time in the world to figure out what you want to do. What I want to do is burn it to the ground and start over." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What I'm going to do is restore it, room by room, memory by memory. I'm going to erase every trace of Marcus and Vicky from these walls, and I'm going to turn this house back into the home my family built. That could take years. I have years. For the first time in months, I have a future. I can spend it however I want." Gerald smiled. "Your father definitely would have been proud." I thought about the letter in the hidden compartment, the one that had predicted this exact scenario decades before it happened, the one that had given me the tools to fight back. "He knew," I said. "Somehow, he knew. And he made sure I would be ready." The first night I slept in my own bed, the original bed, which I had found stored in the garage under a tarp. I dreamed about my mother. She was standing in the rose garden wearing the yellow sundress she always wore in summer, her hands covered in soil. She was planting something, I couldn't see what, and humming a song I remembered from childhood. "Mama?" I said. She looked up and smiled. That warm, knowing smile that had comforted me through every scraped knee and broken heart. "You did well, darling," she said. "You did what needed to be done. I should have seen it sooner. I should have known what he was. Perhaps. But the important thing is that you know now. And you acted." She gestured to the roses around her. These didn't grow overnight. They took years of patience, years of care. The same is true of justice. Sometimes you have to wait for the right season. What do I do now? She smiled again and went back to her planting. Now you bloom. I woke up with tears on my face and the smell of roses in my nose. The next few weeks were a marathon of legal proceedings and media attention. Marcus's arrest made national news. The story had everything: wealth, betrayal, attempted murder, a wife rising from the grave to destroy her killer. The headlines wrote themselves. Dead wife walks, Greenwich heiress exposes husband's murder plot. The Phantom Bride, how Eleanor Carrington came back from the dead, Maid to Mistress to Monster. The rise and fall of Vicky Sinclair. I gave one interview, just one, to the reporter from the Greenwich Gazette who had been skeptical of my death from the beginning. Her name was Sarah Chen, Thomas Chen's daughter, as it turned out, and she had spent months investigating inconsistencies in Marcus's story. I never believed him, she told me. The cremation was too fast. The hospital records were too sealed. And when I tried to talk to your doctors, they had all been paid to disappear. Why didn't you publish anything? She laughed bitterly. I tried. My editor killed the story. Marcus had donated a lot of money to the paper over the years. Apparently, that bought him some editorial discretion. And now? Now the story is too big to kill. Now everyone wants to know what happened to Elena Carrington. She leaned forward, her recorder running. So tell me, what did happen? I told her everything. The article ran 3 days later, spanning 4 full pages of the Sunday edition. It included photographs, my wedding day, Marcus's arrest, the mansion where everything had happened. It included interviews with Dorothy, the nurse who had cared for me in Vermont, with Gerald, who explained the legal mechanisms that had protected my assets, with former colleagues of Marcus, who now admitted they had always found him a little too charming, and it included my mother's roses, blooming in the garden where I had confronted my would-be killer. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from around the country. Women who had survived similar situations. Women who were still trapped. Women who saw in my story a template for their own liberation. I read every single one, and I answered as many as I could. One letter in particular stood out. It was handwritten on expensive stationery, the kind my mother used to buy. The return address was a women's prison in upstate New York. Dear Mrs. Carrington, I know you have no reason to read this letter. I know I have no right to ask for your attention, let alone your forgiveness. But I'm writing anyway. My name is Victoria Sinclair, and I was the other woman in your husband's life. I was also the other woman in his crimes. I helped him plan the fraud. I helped him spend the money. I helped him pretend that you were dead while you were fighting for your life in a hospital bed. I am not writing to make excuses. There are none. What I did was wrong, and I will spend the rest of my life paying for it, both in this prison cell and in my own conscience. But I want you to know something that might matter or might not. I didn't know about the accident. When Marcus told me you had died in a car crash, I believed him. When he said the doctors couldn't save you, I believed him. When he cried at your funeral, I thought those tears were real. I found out the truth the same night you did, when I heard him confess to you in the garden. And yes, I laughed. I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. Because the man I had given everything to was not a grieving widower, but a murderer. Because my entire life had been built on lies, and laughing was easier than screaming. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm not asking for mercy. I've received more than my share of justice. I'm only asking you to know that I am sorry, truly, deeply sorry. Not because I got caught, but because I helped destroy a woman who never did anything to me except be married to the wrong man. I hope you find peace. Mrs. Carrington, I hope you rebuild your life and your home and your heart. And I hope that someday, when you think of me, you think of a woman who made terrible choices and learned too late what they cost. Yours in regret, Victoria Sinclair. I read the letter 3 times. Then I put it in the fireplace and watched it burn. Some things don't deserve a response. The trial was both anticlimactic and utterly satisfying. Marcus pleaded not guilty, of course. His lawyers, a team of expensive suits from a Manhattan firm, tried every trick in the book. They challenged the recordings. They challenged my identity. They challenged the validity of my father's codicil and the authenticity of the shell company documents. They lost on every count. The recordings were authenticated by 3 separate audio forensic experts. My identity was confirmed by DNA testing, fingerprint analysis, and the testimony of 17 witnesses who had known me since childhood. The shell company documents were traced through 6 different countries, all of them leading back to accounts that Marcus controlled. But the moment that sealed his fate came on the 4th day of testimony. The prosecution called an unexpected witness, the widow of the truck driver who had crashed into my car. Her name was Maria Rodriguez, and she was a small, quiet woman with sad eyes and calloused hands. She took the stand with the hesitant movements of someone who had never testified in court before. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" the prosecutor said, "Can you tell the court about the days leading up to your husband's fatal accident?" She nodded, twisting a tissue in her hands. "Carlos came home one night with an envelope full of money. Cash. More cash than I had ever seen. He said it was a bonus from work, but..." She trailed off. "But what?" "But he never got bonuses. He drove trucks for a delivery company. They didn't give bonuses." She looked down at her hands. "I asked him where it came from. He wouldn't tell me. He just said we were going to be okay. That everything was going to be okay." "What happened next?" 3 days later, he was dead." Her voice cracked. "The police said it was an accident, that he fell asleep at the wheel, but Carlos never fell asleep driving. Never. He was very careful, very professional." "Mrs. Rodriguez, after your husband's death, did you receive any additional payments?" "Yes." She pulled another tissue from her pocket. "A man came to our house. He said he was from the trucking company's insurance. He said they wanted to give us a settlement to help with the funeral and everything. He gave me papers to sign, and then..." She swallowed. "And then he gave me another envelope, more cash. He said it was compensation for Carlos's exceptional service." "Did you ask what that meant?" "I tried. He just smiled and said that Carlos had done an important job and that the people he worked for were grateful." She looked at me for the first time since taking the stand. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I thought it was just generosity. I didn't know my husband had been paid to kill someone." The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Marcus's lawyers objected on 17 different grounds, but the damage was done. By the end of the trial, the jury had heard enough. They deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with their verdict. Guilty on all counts. Insurance fraud, forgery, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit murder. Marcus was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. Vicky, who had taken a plea deal in exchange for testimony, received 12 years. I was in the courtroom when the sentences were announced. I watched Marcus's face as the judge read the terms of his punishment. I watched the color drain from his cheeks, the hope fade from his eyes, the reality of his future finally setting in. And I felt nothing. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Not even relief. Just a vast, empty calm, like the surface of a lake after a storm has passed. It was over. Finally, completely, irrevocably over. After the trial, I threw myself into the work of restoration. Not just the house, though that project consumed most of my days. I hired a team of craftsmen to undo every modification Marcus and Vicky had made. The gym was converted back into a library. The garish yellow paint was stripped from the breakfast nook. The original furniture was brought out of storage and returned to its rightful place. But I also restored myself. I found a therapist who specialized in trauma survivors. I started eating regularly, sleeping properly, taking care of the body that had carried me through the worst year of my life. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during my marriage. people who had tried to warn me about Marcus and been pushed away for their trouble. And I started a foundation, the Carrington Foundation for Survivors of Domestic Financial Abuse. It sounded dry, bureaucratic, nothing like the passionate cause that inspired it. But the work was anything but dry. We provided legal assistance to women whose husbands had hidden assets, forged documents, or manipulated finances to trap them in abusive marriages. We funded research into the tactics of financial abusers. We lobbied for stronger laws protecting victims of economic manipulation. And we told stories. Stories like mine. Stories that showed other survivors that they were not alone, that escape was possible, that the men who tried to destroy them could be held accountable. The foundation gave me purpose. It gave me community. It gave me a reason to get out of bed in the morning that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with healing. 1 year to the day after Marcus's arrest, I held a party. Not in the garden where I had confronted him. That felt too much like celebrating on a grave. Instead, I rented a venue in the city, a beautiful rooftop space overlooking the harbor, and invited everyone who had helped me survive. Gerald was there, of course. So was Dorothy, the nurse from Vermont, who had become a close friend and an advisor to my foundation. Sarah Chen attended, now a nationally recognized investigative journalist. The detective, Hernandez, came with her wife and a bottle of champagne. And there were others, survivors I had met through the foundation, lawyers who had donated their time, volunteers who had stuffed envelopes and answered phones. All the people who had contributed in ways large and small to my resurrection. I stood at the edge of the rooftop, looking out at the city lights, when Gerald approached with 2 glasses of wine. "You did it," he said, echoing his words from a year ago. "You really did it." I took the wine and smiled. "We did it. I couldn't have done any of this without you. I just followed your father's instructions. You did the rest." He clinked his glass against mine. "What now?" I thought about the question. What now? The trial was over. The restoration was nearly complete. The foundation was running smoothly. For the first time in years, I had no crisis to manage, no enemy to defeat, no ghost to become. "Now," I said, "I live." Gerald nodded, satisfied. That's the best revenge of all. I stayed on the rooftop long after the other guests had left. The city sparkled below me. Millions of lives playing out in millions of windows, each one a story I would never know. I thought about Marcus, rotting in his prison cell. I thought about Vicky, counting down the years until her release. I thought about the truck driver's widow, living with the knowledge of what her husband had done. And I thought about myself, the woman I had been before the accident, the ghost I had become during my months of hiding, the phoenix I was becoming now. I had lost 18 years to a man who never loved me. I had nearly lost my life. I had been declared dead, buried in an empty grave, erased from existence by the person who should have protected me. And I had survived. More than survived. I had thrived. I had taken everything that had been stolen from me and reclaimed it. I had turned my pain into purpose, my rage into justice, my ghost into a guardian for other women who walked the same dark path. The night air was cool on my face. The stars were faint behind the city lights, but I could still see them, distant and eternal, burning their way through the darkness. I finished my wine and set down the glass. Tomorrow, I would wake up in my childhood home, in the bed where my grandmother had slept, surrounded by the memories of 4 generations of Carrington women. I would eat breakfast in the kitchen where my mother had taught me to cook. I would walk through the garden where my father had taught me the names of roses. And I would be at peace. Not the peace of forgetting. I would never forget what Marcus had done or what it had cost me. That memory would stay with me forever. A scar that would never fully heal. But the peace of knowing that I had done what needed to be done. That I had faced the worst thing that could happen to me and emerged stronger. That I had looked death in the face and refused to blink. Marcus had tried to bury me. Instead, he had planted a seed. And from that seed, something beautiful had grown. 3 years later, I received a letter that I almost didn't open. The envelope was plain white, the handwriting unfamiliar. The return address was a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania, the same facility where Marcus was serving his sentence. My first instinct was to throw it away unopened. I had heard nothing from Marcus since the trial. No appeals, no requests for visitation, no attempts at contact of any kind. His lawyers had stopped calling after the first year, when it became clear that there was no hope of overturning his conviction. As far as I was concerned, Marcus Carrington had ceased to exist the moment the prison doors closed behind him. But something made me open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of prison stationery, covered in Marcus's handwriting. The letters were smaller than I remembered, cramped and careful, as if he had rationed every stroke of the pen. Elena, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to respond. But I need to write it anyway, because the therapist they make me see says that accountability is the first step toward rehabilitation. And even though I think that's nonsense, I've run out of other things to do with my time. I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer? Stage 4. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe less. The irony of being killed by my own body after spending so much effort trying to kill you is not lost on me. God, or the universe, or whatever force controls these things, apparently has a sense of humor. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. You would be a fool to give it, and whatever else you are, Elena, you are never a fool. I'm not writing to explain myself either. There is no explanation that would satisfy you, and none that would satisfy me. I'm writing because I want you to know that I understand. I understand what I did. Not just the legal definition of my crimes. I've had 3 years to memorize those. But the human weight of them. I tried to kill my wife. I tried to erase the woman who had loved me for 18 years, who had trusted me with her life and her fortune and her heart. I tried to bury her in an empty grave and dance on the dirt, and I failed. Not because of any flaw in my plan. The plan was perfect. The truck driver was reliable. The doctor was bribed. The insurance company was fooled. Everything worked exactly as it was supposed to work. I failed because I underestimated you. I spent 18 years looking at you and seeing what I wanted to see. A naive heiress, a lonely woman, a target for my ambition. I never saw the steel beneath the silk. I never imagined that the woman who cried at sad movies and apologized to waiters could transform herself into a weapon capable of destroying me. That was my mistake. Not the murder plot, not the insurance fraud, not even the bigamy. Those were just crimes. My mistake was believing that you were weak. You were never weak, Elena. You were patient. You were strategic. You were waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. And when it came, you struck with a precision that I still can't fully comprehend. I'm not asking you to visit me. I'm not asking you to attend my funeral if there is one. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just telling you that I see you now. The real you. The woman you always were beneath the surface I was too arrogant to notice. And I'm telling you that you won. Not just the trial, not just the money, not just the house. You won because you survived. You won because you rebuilt. You won because you took the worst thing that ever happened to you and transformed it into something that helps other women escape their own monsters. I will die in this prison cell, alone, forgotten, with nothing but my regrets for company. You will continue to thrive, to grow, to change lives, to be remembered. That is what winning looks like. I see that now. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand. Marcus. I read the letter 3 times, the same way I had read Vicky's letter years ago. But this time, I didn't burn it. Instead, I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer of my desk, the same desk where my father had hidden the documents that saved my life. I didn't know why I kept it, perhaps as a reminder, perhaps as proof that even the darkest souls can eventually see the light, or perhaps just because some stories don't end with a fire. Some stories end with silence and understanding, and the long, slow process of letting go. Marcus died 4 months later. I learned about it from the newspaper not from any personal notification. The obituary was short, just a few paragraphs about his business career, his conviction, his death in custody. There was no mention of me, no reference to our marriage, no acknowledgement of the life he had tried to steal. I didn't attend the funeral. Neither, apparently, did anyone else. According to Gerald, Marcus was buried in a prison cemetery, his grave marked only by a number. No headstone, no flowers, no visitors. I thought I would feel something when I heard the news. Satisfaction, maybe, or relief, or even a distant sadness for the man I had once loved. Instead, I felt nothing. Just that same vast, empty calm I had experienced at his sentencing. Some graves are dug long before the body fills them. Marcus had been dead to me for years. His physical death was just a formality, the final punctuation mark at the end of a sentence I had already finished writing. That night, I walked through the garden my mother had planted. The roses were in bloom, pink and white and red, their petals soft as silk, their fragrance filling the air with memories of my childhood. I touched each bush as I passed, remembering the day my mother had taught me their names. Cecile Brunner, Iceberg, Don Juan, Mr. Lincoln. I won, Mama, I said to the empty garden. He's gone, and I'm still here. The roses didn't answer. They never did. But as I stood there in the fading light, surrounded by the legacy of 4 generations of Carrington women, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of victory, not the peace of revenge, the peace of finally, truly, completely letting go. I stayed in the garden until the stars came out. Then I went inside, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat in the library my grandmother had built. The library I had restored, book by book, memory by memory. The fire crackled in the fireplace. The books lined the walls like old friends. The portrait of my mother, which I had recovered from storage and rehung above the mantel, smiled down at me with her knowing eyes. I'm going to be okay, I told her. I'm going to be more than okay. And for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed 3 years ago, I believed it. The foundation continued to grow. Within 5 years, we had opened offices in 12 cities. We had helped over 3,000 women escape financially abusive marriages. We had lobbied successfully for new laws requiring greater transparency in marital finances. We had published a book, a collection of survivor stories, including my own, that became a bestseller and was translated into 14 languages. But the work that mattered most to me wasn't the big victories. It was the small ones. The woman who called our hotline in the middle of the night, sobbing, convinced that there was no way out, and who, 6 months later, sent me a photo of her new apartment, her new job, her new life. The woman who had been married to a man who controlled every penny she spent, and who, after working with our lawyers, discovered that she was entitled to half of an estate worth millions. The woman who had been told over and over that she was crazy, that she was paranoid, that she was imagining things, and who, with our help, obtained the recordings and documents that proved she had been right all along. These were my victories now, not the destruction of Marcus Carrington, but the resurrection of women like me. Women who had been buried by the men who should have loved them. Women who had clawed their way back to the surface and learned to breathe again. Every day, I received letters from survivors. Some were grateful, some were heartbreaking. Some were angry, frustrated, still trapped in situations they couldn't escape. I answered every single one. You are not alone, I wrote. You are not crazy. You are not imagining things. What you are experiencing is real, and it is wrong, and it is not your fault. And then I gave them the tools to fight back, the same tools my father had given me, the same tools that had saved my life. Because that's what survivors do. We don't just escape. We reach back and pull others out behind us. We build ladders from our own bones and throw them down into the darkness, hoping that someone else will find the strength to climb. I had been buried alive by the man I loved. Now I spent my days digging graves for the men who tried to bury women like me. On the 10th anniversary of my death, I held a ceremony. Not a somber one, not a memorial, a celebration. I invited everyone who had been part of my journey. Gerald, now retired, but still sharp as ever. Dorothy, who had moved to Connecticut to be closer to the foundation. Sarah Chen, who had won a Pulitzer for her investigative reporting on domestic abuse. Detective Hernandez, who had become a consultant for our law enforcement training programs. And the survivors, hundreds of them. Women who had escaped impossible situations. Women who had rebuilt their lives from nothing. Women who had gone on to help others escape. We gathered in the garden of my family home, the same garden where Marcus had been arrested, now transformed into a sanctuary for healing. The roses were in bloom, as they always were this time of year. The fairy lights twinkled in the trees. The string quartet played Vivaldi, the same piece they had played at the party where everything had ended and begun. I stood at the microphone and looked out at the crowd. 10 years ago today, I said, I was declared dead. A ripple of murmurs ran through the audience. My husband forged a death certificate. He held a funeral. He collected my life insurance and married his mistress in my house. As far as the world was concerned, Elena Carrington was gone. I paused, letting the words sink in. But here's what I've learned in the decades since. Death is not the end. Not the kind of death Marcus tried to give me. Not the kind of death that comes from erasure, from betrayal, from the slow suffocation of a soul that deserves to breathe. I looked out at the faces in the crowd, the survivors, the helpers, the believers. We are all standing in graves that someone dug for us. Husbands, parents, bosses, friends, people who looked at us and saw something small, something controllable, something that could be buried and forgotten. I stepped away from the microphone and walked to the edge of the stage. But graves don't hold us unless we let them. We have the power to climb out, to reach for the light, to plant flowers in the dirt that was meant to cover us. I gestured to the roses surrounding us. These roses were planted by my mother. They have survived droughts and storms and neglect. They have bloomed every year for 40 years. No matter what tried to kill them, I turned back to the crowd. We are the roses. We are the survivors. We are the women who refuse to stay buried. The applause started slowly, then built to a roar. Women stood. They cheered. They cried. They held each other and remembered where they had been and celebrated how far they had come. And I stood in the center of it all, surrounded by roses, surrounded by survivors, surrounded by the legacy I had built from the ashes of my own destruction. Marcus had tried to bury me. Instead, he had planted a garden. That night, after the guests had left and the caterers had packed up, I walked through my house one final time. The restoration was complete. Every room had been returned to its original glory. Every trace of Marcus and Vicky had been erased. The library held 10,000 books again. My mother's portrait hung above the fireplace. My grandmother's jewelry sparkled in its hidden safe. But it was more than restoration. It was transformation. The house that had once been a prison was now a sanctuary. The rooms where I had been humiliated as a maid were now filled with memories of survivors, retreats, of strategy sessions, of celebrations and milestones, and the slow, steady work of healing. I climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, my bedroom now, mine alone, and sat on the edge of the bed where 4 generations of Carrington women had slept. The window looked out over the rose garden. The moon was bright enough to see the flowers, their colors muted to silver in the pale light. They swayed gently in the night breeze, as if waving goodnight. I thought about everything that had happened in the 10 years since I woke up in that hospital bed. The terror, the rage, the patience, the revenge, the healing, the purpose. I thought about Marcus, dead and forgotten in a prison cemetery. I thought about Vicky, released after serving her full sentence, last seen working at a department store in Ohio under a different name. I thought about all the women I had helped, and all the women I would never meet, and all the women who were lying awake right now, trapped in marriages that were slowly killing them, wondering if escape was possible. It's possible, I said to the empty room. It's always possible. Then I closed my eyes and slept. No nightmares, no ghosts, just the deep, dreamless sleep of a woman who had fought her war and won. In the morning, I would wake up and continue the work. I would answer letters and meet with lawyers and speak at conferences. I would tell my story to anyone who needed to hear it. I would reach into graves and pull out hands that were reaching back. But for now, just for this moment, I was at peace. Elena Carrington, wife, widow, ghost, survivor, warrior, healer, all of these things, and something more. Something that couldn't be named or categorized or explained. Something that had been planted in the darkness and had grown toward the light. Something beautiful, something alive, something that would never be buried again. Epilogue. 20 years after the day I was declared dead, I stood in front of a room full of law students at Yale. The invitation had come 6 months earlier, a request to deliver the commencement address for the graduating class of the law school. My first instinct had been to decline. I wasn't a lawyer, I wasn't an academic, I was just a woman who had survived something terrible and turned that survival into a career of advocacy. But the dean had been persistent. "Mrs. Carrington," she had written, "your story has inspired an entire generation of legal professionals. More than a dozen of our current students chose to study family law specifically because of your foundation's work. They want to hear from you. They need to hear from you." So here I was, 62 years old, my hair now silver where it had once been brown, my face lined with decades of purpose and perseverance. Standing at a podium in front of 200 young people who were about to begin careers in a profession that had both saved and betrayed me. When I was your age, I began, I thought I knew what justice looked like. I thought it lived in courtrooms and law books and the solemn pronouncements of judges. I thought it could be weighed on scales and measured in years of imprisonment. I looked out at the sea of young faces, so eager, so hopeful, so certain that they were about to change the world. I was wrong. A murmur ran through the crowd. Justice isn't a thing. It's not a noun. It's a verb. It's something you do every day, in small ways and large. It's choosing to believe the woman who says she's being abused, even when her husband is charming and well-connected. It's fighting for the client who can't pay, because her case matters even if her bank account doesn't. It's standing up to the partners and the judges and the systems that tell you to be quiet, to go along, to accept the status quo. I stepped away from the podium and walked to the edge of the stage. Some of you have read my story. You know about my husband and what he did and how I survived. But what you may not know is that the legal system almost failed me completely. I paused, letting the words sink in. When I first contacted the police about Marcus's fraud, they didn't believe me. They saw a hysterical woman making wild accusations against a respected businessman. When I presented my evidence to the first attorney, I consulted. He told me I should accept a quiet settlement and move on with my life. When I tried to report the forged death certificate to the state medical board, they suggested I might be suffering from trauma-induced delusions. The students were silent now, their faces troubled. The system is not designed to help women like me. It's not designed to believe survivors, to protect victims, to punish the powerful. It's designed to maintain the status quo, to protect property and preserve order, to keep the machinery running smoothly even when that machinery is crushing the people it was built to serve. I walked back to the podium. But here's the thing about systems. They're made of people. People like you. People who can choose to believe or not believe. People who can choose to fight or surrender. People who can choose to change the system from the inside, one case at a time, one client at a time, one moment of courage at a time. I looked out at the graduating class. Some of you will become prosecutors. I'm asking you to take seriously the cases of financial abuse, of coercive control, of the slow violence that happens behind closed doors. These cases are hard to prove and easy to dismiss. Don't dismiss them. I move my gaze to another section of the audience. Some of you will become defense attorneys. I'm asking you to remember that not every accuser is lying, and not every accused is innocent. Your job is to ensure a fair trial. not to destroy the lives of the people who had the courage to speak up. Another section. Some of you will become judges. I'm asking you to remember that the law is not just words on paper. It's the difference between freedom and prison, between safety and danger, between life and death. Every decision you make matters. Everyone. I paused for a long moment, and some of you, I hope many of you, will become advocates. Not just lawyers, but fighters. The kind of people who see injustice and refuse to look away. The kind of people who build foundations and lobby for legislation and answer hotlines at 3 a.m. because someone, somewhere, needs to hear that they're not alone. I stepped back from the podium one final time. I was buried alive by the man I loved. The system that was supposed to protect me failed at every turn. And yet here I am, 20 years later, standing in front of you, telling you that change is possible. I smiled. Because it is. I'm proof of that. The foundation I built has helped thousands of women escape impossible situations. The laws we lobbied for have changed the way courts handle financial abuse. The stories we told have made it harder for men like Marcus to hide behind charm and connections. I gestured to the audience. You are the next generation of that change. You have the education, the credentials, the power to transform the system from within. The question is, will you use it? I let the question hang in the air. I hope you will. I believe you will. And I'll be watching, cheering you on, for as long as I have breath in my body. I stepped back and waited. For a moment, nothing happened. Then one student stood, then another, then a dozen, then 50. Then the entire graduating class was on their feet, applauding, cheering, crying. I stood there and let their energy wash over me. These young people would go out into the world and fight the same battles I had fought. Some would win, some would lose. Some would burn out or sell out or give up. But some would remember this moment. Some would carry my words with them into courtrooms and conference rooms and the quiet conversations where the real decisions get made. Some would become the advocates I needed and never had. That was enough. That was more than enough. After the ceremony, the dean invited me to a small reception in her office. Wine and cheese and polite conversation with the faculty and major donors. I was making small talk with a constitutional law professor when a young woman approached me. She was wearing a graduation gown over a simple black dress, and her eyes were red from crying. "Mrs. Carrington," she said, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I had to thank you." I turned to face her fully. "Of course. What's your name?" "Maria. Maria Rodriguez." She hesitated. "My mother. She wrote you a letter, years ago, about my father, about what he did." The name hit me like a punch to the chest. Maria Rodriguez, the daughter of the truck driver, the man Marcus had paid to kill me. I must have looked shocked because she took a step back. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I shouldn't have. I'll go." "No." I reached out and took her hand. "Please. Stay. Tell me." She swallowed hard. "My mother. She spent years trying to make sense of what happened. She didn't know what my father had done until after your trial. When she found out, it nearly destroyed her." "I remember her testimony," I said quietly. "She was very brave. She wanted you to know that she was sorry, that we were all sorry, that we would have done anything to take it back if we could." I squeezed her hand. "I know." After the trial, she started working with domestic violence organizations. She said it was her way of atoning for what my father did. She worked with them until the day she died. When did she pass? 2 years ago. Cancer. Maria's eyes filled with tears. Before she died, she made me promise to go to law school. She said that if I became a lawyer, I could help other women the way your foundation helped her. I stared at this young woman, the daughter of the man who had been paid to kill me, now standing in front of me with a law degree, ready to fight the same battles I had fought. The universe did, indeed, have a sense of humor. "Maria," I said slowly, "I think your mother would be very proud of you." "I hope so. What kind of law do you want to practice?" "Family law. Specifically, financial abuse. And divorce. She smiled through her tears. Your foundation's model is my template. I want to do what you do. Help women escape men who are trying to destroy them. I thought about Marcus. About the $500,000 he had paid to Carlos Rodriguez to drive a truck into my car. About the chain of pain and destruction that had rippled out from that single transaction. And I thought about how that same chain had led to this moment, to a young woman who wanted to dedicate her life to preventing what had happened to me from happening to anyone else. I'll tell you what, I said. When you pass the bar, give me a call. The foundation is always looking for passionate young lawyers. Maria's face lit up. Really? Really? Your mother's journey from tragedy to advocacy is exactly the kind of story we tell. And yours could be even more powerful. She hugged me then, a spontaneous, fierce embrace that I hadn't expected and didn't resist. I held her for a long moment, feeling the weight of all the years, all the pain, all the unexpected connections that had led us both to this room. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for being here so I could find you. Thank you for finding me, I said. Thank you for continuing the work. We stood there for another moment, two strangers bound together by violence and healing, by loss and hope, by the strange alchemy that transforms tragedy into purpose. Then she pulled away, wiped her eyes, and smiled. I'll call you, she said. I promise. I know you will. She disappeared into the crowd, and I stood alone by the window, looking out at the Yale campus, where my mother had earned her degree 60 years ago. The world was a strange place, full of pain and betrayal, yes, but also full of unexpected connections and surprising redemptions. Full of people like Maria Rodriguez, who carried the weight of their parents' sins and transformed that weight into wings. I had been buried alive, and from that burial had grown not just my own resurrection, but the resurrection of countless others. Women I would never meet, lives I would never know, stories that would continue long after I was gone. That was the real victory. Not the trial, not the money, not the house. The real victory was this: that my survival had mattered, that my pain had meant something, that the worst thing that ever happened to me had become the best thing that ever happened to thousands of other women. Marcus had tried to bury me. Instead, he had planted a forest. And the forest would keep growing, keep spreading, keep providing shelter for those who needed it, long after both of us were forgotten. I finished my wine and left the reception. Outside, the evening was warm and clear. I walked slowly across the campus, past the library where I had researched my father's codicil, past the law school where Maria Rodriguez had just graduated, past the memorial garden where my mother's name was engraved on a donor's plaque. I was 62 years old. I had lived through attempted murder, legal battles, the collapse and reconstruction of my entire world. I had become someone I never expected to be. Not the naive heiress Marcus had married, not the invisible ghost he had tried to make me, but something stronger, something fiercer, something that bloomed in the darkness and refused to be cut down. I had years left, I hoped, years to continue the work, to tell the stories, to reach into graves and pull out hands that were reaching back. But even when those years ran out, even when I joined my parents in whatever came next, the forest would remain. The foundation would remain. The stories would remain. That was immortality. Not the kind Marcus had tried to steal from me. The kind I had earned. I drove home through the familiar Connecticut countryside, past the houses of neighbors I had known for decades, past the church where my parents were married, past the cemetery where my mother was buried. I didn't stop at the cemetery. I didn't need to. My mother wasn't there in that cold ground. She was in the roses that bloomed in my garden. She was in the foundation that bore our family name. She was in every woman who had escaped abuse because of the tools we provided, every lawyer who had chosen family law because of the stories we told, every survivor who had learned that resurrection was possible. She was alive in all the ways that mattered. And so was I. I pulled into the driveway of my family home, the home that had been in my family for a century. The home Marcus had tried to steal. The home I had reclaimed and restored and transformed into something new. The roses were blooming in the garden. The fairy lights twinkled in the trees. The portrait of my mother smiled down from above the fireplace. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the library, surrounded by the books my grandmother had collected, the furniture my great-grandfather had built, the memories of 4 generations of Carrington women. And I was at peace. Not because the battles were over. They weren't. There would always be more women to help, more laws to change, more systems to fight. But I was at peace because I knew that I had done what I was meant to do. I had taken the worst thing that ever happened to me and transformed it into something beautiful. I had turned my grave into a garden. And from that garden, life was still growing. Would always be growing. Forever. The last time I visited Marcus's grave was on what would have been our 40th wedding anniversary. I didn't know why I went. I hadn't planned to. I was on my way to a speaking engagement in Philadelphia when something, call it curiosity, call it closure, call it the strange gravity that pulls us toward the places where our stories ended, made me take a detour to the federal prison cemetery in rural Pennsylvania. The cemetery was nothing like I expected. I had imagined something bleak, industrial, a parking lot for the forgotten dead. Instead, it was almost peaceful. Rolling hills, oak trees, rows of simple markers, each one bearing only a number and a date. I found Marcus's marker in the 3rd row from the back, 472891. That was all. No name, no epitaph, no indication that this patch of earth held the remains of a man who had once been charming enough to fool me for 18 years. I stood there for a long time, looking at the marker, waiting to feel something. Anger? Gone, burned away years ago. Sadness? Perhaps a trace, the way you feel sad for a house that has burned down, even if you never lived in it. Triumph? No. There was nothing triumphant about this moment. Just an old woman standing in a cemetery, looking at the grave of a man who had once meant everything to her, and now meant nothing at all. I forgive you, I said finally. The words surprised me. I hadn't planned to say them. Hadn't known I felt them until they were out of my mouth. But they were true. I forgave Marcus Carrington. Not because he deserved it, not because what he did could ever be made right, but because carrying that weight, that hatred, that eternal grudge, it was too heavy. It had served its purpose, fueling my revenge, driving my advocacy, keeping me alive in the darkest moments. But now it was just, wait. I forgive you, I said again, and I'm letting you go. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single rose, a pink one from my mother's garden. I had cut it that morning without knowing why, and now I did. I laid the rose on his grave. Then I turned and walked back to my car, and I never looked back. The speaking engagement that afternoon was at a women's shelter in North Philadelphia. A small audience, maybe 30 women, most of them with fresh bruises and haunted eyes, all of them fighting their own battles for survival. I told them my story, the condensed version, the one I had told 1,000 times. The accident, the betrayal, the disguise, the revenge, the rebuilding. And then I told them something I had never said in a speech before. This morning, I said, I visited my husband's grave. A murmur ran through the small audience. He tried to kill me. He declared me dead. He stole everything I had and gave it to another woman. He was the villain of my story, the monster in my nightmares. The reason I spent years learning to sleep with the lights on. I paused. And this morning, I forgave him. Silence. Confusion on some faces. Anger on others. How could I forgive the man who had done those terrible things? I forgave him because forgiveness isn't about the person you're forgiving. It's about yourself. It's about putting down the weapon you've been carrying for so long that you've forgotten it's there. It's about saying, I choose to stop fighting this battle. I choose to let this war be over. A woman in the front row was crying. She was young, maybe 25, with a black eye that makeup couldn't quite hide, and a wedding ring she kept twisting on her finger. I'm not telling you to forgive the men who hurt you. That's your choice, and only you can make it. Maybe you'll forgive them tomorrow. Maybe you'll forgive them in 20 years. Maybe you'll never forgive them at all, and that's okay too. I walked toward the woman in the front row. But I am telling you this. Whatever happens with forgiveness, don't let them keep you. Don't let them live in your head rent-free, taking up space that belongs to your future. Don't let them define you by what they did, instead of by what you survived. I crouched down until I was at eye level with her. You are more than his victim. You are more than her survivor. You are a woman with a whole life ahead of her, and every moment you spend hating him is a moment you're not spending loving yourself. She reached out and grabbed my hand. Her grip was desperate, drowning, the grip of someone who was just beginning to believe that survival was possible. "How?" she whispered. "How do I start?" I squeezed her hand back. "You already have. You're here. You're listening. You're fighting." I smiled. "That's how it starts. One moment at a time, one day at a time, one breath at a time. And then you wake up one morning and you realize that you've been breathing without thinking about it, that you've been living without fighting for it, that the weight you've been carrying has gotten lighter, not because someone took it away, but because you've gotten stronger." I stood up and addressed the whole room again. Survival isn't a destination, it's a practice. Every day, you choose to survive. Every day, you choose to move forward instead of back. And every day, you get a little better at it. I walked back to the front of the room. I am 62 years old. I was declared dead at 42. That means I have lived 20 years beyond my grave. 20 years of rebuilding, of healing, of helping other women climb out of their own graves. I spread my arms wide, and I'm still here, still fighting, still surviving, still growing. I pointed at the audience. You will be too, I promise you. Whatever you're going through right now, however dark it seems, however impossible the future looks, you will survive, you will grow, you will bloom. I paused, letting the words sink in. Because that's what women do. We adapt, we endure, we transform. We take the dirt they try to bury us under and we use it to plant gardens. I smiled. So go plant your gardens, ladies. The world is waiting to see what you grow. The applause started small and built to something that felt like a wave, like a force of nature, like the sound of 30 women deciding that they were going to survive. I stood there and let it wash over me, the same way I had let the applause wash over me at Yale, the same way I would let it wash over me at every speaking engagement for the rest of my life. Because this was my purpose now. Not revenge, not justice, not even healing. Connection. Reaching into the darkness and finding hands that were reaching back. Telling my story so that other women would know their stories mattered too. Building a bridge between the grave I had escaped and the future I had created. That was what Marcus had given me, in the end. Not intentionally, not kindly, not through any virtue of his own, but he had given me a mission, a purpose, a reason to live beyond the simple fact of survival. He had tried to bury me, and I had used the dirt to grow something that would outlast us both. I drove home that night through the gathering dusk, past the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, past the prison where Marcus had died, past the cemetery where his body lay forgotten beneath a numbered marker. I drove home to my family's estate, where the roses were blooming and the fairy lights were twinkling, and 4 generations of Carrington women were watching over me from photographs and memories. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the garden, watching the stars come out one by one. And I thought about everything. Every moment of every year since that terrible morning when I had woken up in a hospital bed and discovered that my husband had tried to kill me. The rage, the grief, the planning, the patience, the revenge, the healing, the growth. All of it had led to this moment, this garden, this peace. Marcus had tried to bury me. He had failed. And now I was free, truly, finally, completely free. I finished my wine and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, a woman was lying awake, wondering if escape was possible. Tomorrow, she would call our hotline, and a volunteer would answer, and the long, slow process of survival would begin. Somewhere out there, a young lawyer was preparing her first case, armed with the knowledge and resources our foundation had provided, ready to fight for a woman who couldn't fight for herself. Somewhere out there, a survivor was telling her story for the first time, discovering that her pain had meaning, that her experience could help others, that the worst thing that ever happened to her could become the best thing that ever happened to someone else. The forest was growing, and I had planted the first seed. I closed my eyes and listened to the night sounds, the crickets, the distant traffic, the soft rustle of roses in the breeze. I was at peace. And peace, I had learned, was the greatest victory of all.